All right. Now we welcome in a man with a pretty incredible background. He was once Metallica's A&R man. He co-produced and co-wrote some films you might have heard of, like Rounders and Ocean's 13. He's the main man behind the incredible show Billions, which I think has won 4 million awards and stuff. But he's also a big metalhead and a big music fan. My friend Brian Koppelman, sir, how are you?
Brian, I'm so happy to be here with you. Whenever anyone mentions Metallica, I was so lucky to get to be around them, and I got to write about it in their box set for And Justice for All. But and then they came on Billions, but obviously Michael, you signed them, and then Michael Alago. I was just I was just a lucky kid along for the ride. I had nothing to do with their success, but I got to have so much fun, like watching those guys sound check a bunch of nights, and it was really incredible.
Well, you help maintain some of it, so don't downplay yourself too much.
Thank you. No, but I'm talking to the guy. I mean, the truth is, between you and Alago, it really did change music. Not just. I was looking today, and Metallica. When you look at Spotify, and you look at the most played artists, the first real band, rock band, is Metallica, and it's an incredible thing because and it ties into what we're going to talk about, is that all this music was so rebellious and so outside of the mainstream and so disconnected from what was going on in the culture. And for you to see it when you did and really, plant a flag, and it's just an incredible achievement.
Right place at the right time. I mean, that's I just a fan, and I couldn't play an instrument, so the only way I knew was, well, how else can I help? So I just did whatever I could do, and like I said, I was lucky enough to be in Los Angeles at that time when all this stuff was going on. It's just kind of crazy when you think back about all that stuff, but it was fun. This song we're going to talk about today, which both you and I are very passionate about, as well as a lot of other people are that know it, and one of the most underrated songs of all time and underrated albums of all time, if not the most underrated album. But the story behind why you're here today is kind of funny, because I was sitting down and I was starting to put together a list of like the next people and songs I wanted to talk about. And I put that list together maybe 5 hours before you sent me a DM and said, "Hey, if you ever do something on Fire Down Under or Swords and Tequila, I'm your man." Your ears must have been burning earlier in the day, because that's exactly what happened. And I go, well, we got to make this happen, because that record and this song Swords and Tequila is such an amazing record, and absolutely by far one of the most important 100 songs to define heavy metal, because of when it came out, what the story behind it was, so many different things. Where did you first hear this song?
Brian, I am so glad to get to talk about Riot and Swords and Tequila, because talk about a band that just could not catch a break, and all the good luck that so many other bands had. It's like the opposite of it. The bad luck went and found these guys in Brooklyn. And, when I think about this record, I remember I think whenever you did the first sort of remaster, that was great in the late 90s or right around 2000. I remember calling you or writing you and being like, this is so badass. And because I was a kid and I was reading Kerrang, and I was reading all of the press about the new wave of British heavy metal, and I fucking loved this music so much. And it's not a cliche, and it's not an exaggeration to say that music gets you through the worst times of your life, and you really hold on to it when you really need it. And I remember there was something about Riot that was pretty interesting to me, those first two records. But the first two records are very tame production-wise. I don't think that Steve and Billy really knew yet how to make these records. I'm sure when you talk to the producers about this, they'll talk about it. But I knew those records a little bit. I loved the whole vibe, that they looked like, this was still a time when metal bands were dressing up a certain way and acting a certain way, and they weren't. Guy was up there looking like what he later became, a plump, right? He was there in a t-shirt, and Mark Reale, had part of the bad luck is, he had terrible hair, and none of it was right. You know what I mean? But I'll never forget. And the worst mascot in the history of music.
Oh, come on now! But people always say that, but I for some reason I think that guy's cute in a metal way.
that you feel that way.
But I agree. Most people will agree with what you say. That's for sure.
But when I heard, so I'm 15 years old, I think, in 81, 80, and I wrote about this record for a compilation about albums that barely, I think it got to number 100 maybe on the charts. But
89.
Yeah, some number like that, right? What happened was when the first two records came out, I used to read the backs of albums really close because, as you know, my dad was in the record business, so I knew about the business, but he was so far from hard rock, and that's part of what drew me to hard rock. It was a way music could be rebellion in my household, right? You needed to be rebellion. But I knew, I remember I wrote to a bunch of people. I would try to call and see if their phone number, and I reached like the producers of those records, these guys, Steve Loeb and Billy.
Steve Loeb, really? Oh, that's amazing.
And yeah, I used to talk to those guys. I would take the train into the city, and they would let me come hang out at Green Street sometimes, where they were making the records with the great Rod Hui, who became a huge engineer in hip hop. But eventually,
that's incredible.
And I remember putting on Fire Down Under, and I would always get records, and it was a ritual to me when I would get an album. I'd go to this one record store. As you know, because you worked in record stores, the guys who manage the record stores, they learn the kids who are there because music's saving their lives, right? And they're spending any money they have on records. And I was one of those kids. And I remember buying it and coming home, and I had a couple of friends I would listen with, but I listened alone. And Fire Down Under comes on, and it's a great song. Because title track, so I listened to it. When I heard Swords and Tequila, the first whole bunch of songs, right? Outlaw, those first songs, but Swords and Tequila in particular, the coolest riff I'd ever heard in my life. It was almost like if you took the perfect Richie Blackmore idea of a riff, but with a modern sort of sound of what the metal really sounded like. And then that doubling of Guy Speranza's voice or echo, whatever that is that created that effect. And those words, look, there's nothing a 15-year-old suburban kid who's basically gotten in 3 fights in his life wants to think about more than being tough enough to fucking show up to have a Swords and Tequila night. And so this idea, and also the way that the band Riot seemed like it was them against the world, was really something that, because the whole story, even on those first couple records, was like they got dropped or they almost got dropped, or they were opening for people who they hated that. It was like a constant battle.
Well, this record, this record in particular, because since you mentioned that, this was originally turned down by Capitol because they were on Capitol Records, and they delivered this record. Capitol said, no, it's too heavy. You got to go remake it and do something lighter. And the band's and Steve Loeb and the band are like, no, this is the record we made, and we think it's a good record, or we're not going to do that. And they fought with Capitol. I think it delayed that record for almost a year, because I remember hearing stories about this. Like it was kind of through the underground of back then, which was a real underground because there's no internet or anything. I think it might have even been Kerrang, like you mentioned something about, hey, Riot's records are coming out because Capitol wouldn't put it out. And so eventually it came out on Elektra. And I was so excited to hear this record because of all the stories behind it and all the stuff that had happened to the band. And then we got it. We're like, oh my God, no wonder this. I mean, this is a extremely heavy record for a major label in 1981.
Oh yeah. It's not speed metal, but it's real heavy metal. It's like if you took the heaviest UFO tracks and put them on an American record. And I think you can't underestimate, dude, I listened to Swords and Tequila. Like I must have listened to it 40 times in a row or something like that, and then because I was writing letters to people, which back then there was no email, right? So that's what you had to do. And then maybe someone would call you up, and especially a band, I realized, as I'm sure you did too, as a fan, the bands that weren't huge, if there was a kid who was talking about this band, like the manager would call you. So they would invite you to a show, right? They would come to Lemoore. And so they were playing a club on Long Island called My Father's Place. And by this time I had seen them at a couple spots, and I knew them a little bit.
I'm so jealous, by the way.
I convinced my parents, because the club was like a mile away from home. And I convinced my parents to let me have a barbecue and invite Riot over. And they came over.
That's amazing.
They came over on this tour, the beginning of the tour, like on Long Island. And so the band came over to my house, and we cooked fucking hamburgers and hot dogs with Riot. before they went and played this gig. And so I was underage, but I got to go to this bar with them and carry I got to roadie in and carry shit and hang out at the board when they were playing the songs from this album. And so that kind of thing, it's become for me. I've talked about this record endlessly anywhere I go. And I keep waiting for the moment. I knew when I wrote you, so what you were talking about is when I saw that you were doing this and I started listening to the show and I love it. I was like, I know Slagel's going to do Swords of Tequila. I didn't even write you asking if you were. I think I wrote you and I was like, dude, we do Swords of Tequila. Just know I'm here.
Exactly.
And you immediately wrote back, you're on the list already, of course, because it's Riot, fans of Riot. Like I know you've talked to Lars about this. And I've never found the Steve Harris quote, but supposedly Steve Harris also thinks that this is a great record.
Yep.
And it has every single thing. It's an anthem, but it's not corny. You can feel the desperation that these guys were on the brink of falling apart. Every minute they were on the brink of falling apart because, like, I guess Guy didn't really want to do it. You had Mark, who was on sick, right, and on borrowed time his whole life. And there is in this record, in the grooves of this record, it's kind of like these guys going, let's give it every fucking thing that we fucking have, which is the greatest thing when you feel that on a metal record, you know? I mean, I love that you had John Bush on because Armored Saints records had the same quality on the West Coast. In a weird way, they were like a West Coast version of Riot. They had more success because they were in a scene. There was no scene that Riot was in. I think the New York bands were more independent in a way. LA, because of the Strip and because of those clubs, I think there was a scene that developed. But in New York, I think it was at that time much less of it. Twisted were doing their own thing where they were. Zebra were doing their own thing where they were. And Riot was doing their own thing. And it wasn't like a group. Later, Anthrax, Dan Lilker, those guys, but that was a couple years later when Scott really kind of, and Danny decided, I think, to put a scene together, or a scene fell in together. But Riot wasn't part of that, really.
They were too early. There's so many reasons why when you look back on this, because same with you, I've had a million conversations about this record with so many different people because it really is a long lost record. We did reissues and we're able to put it out again, and we had some success with it, more so over in Europe, and the band continued on with Mark and a whole bunch of other guys and had some pretty good success in the early 2000s over in Europe, which was kind of fun because Mark was I got to be a fairly good friends with him, and just like you said, unfortunately he's sick all the time, but what an amazing guy he was. So cool. And the guy's a legend. I mean, he wrote all these songs, and like you said, that the opening riff to this song, Swords of Tequila. If you guys haven't ever heard this song, just go listen to that song. That opening riff has influenced so many other riffs and so many other bands that has happened. I love that you said it's like a Ritchie Blackmore riff, because it's kind of like the opening riff to Burn or something, which Ritchie would write. But they just
it is, man. It's
totally.
Like and the band was, I think you gotta say, like, even though Rick Ventura is part of the original, even though he wasn't, I guess, on the first, like, he wasn't the original guitar player, but he wrote Outlaw, right? And he's a great guitar player to complement Mark, right? And the band was just really popping, and Steve and Billy and Rod figured out how to make this record sound really cool, whereas the other records were kind of caught in between. They sounded a little bit like an Angel record at times, or a Kiss record, but this one sounded like what it was. And then that tried, to me as a storyteller, right? Part of why I think is that then Guy, who is the thing that makes them a separating element, right? He is this, whether he's technically a great singer or not, the lead vocals on this album are just incredible.
Amazing.
And lots of singers have sang Swords and Tequila. I mean, it's right, the versions of Riot that have gone on the road, and Rhett Forrester, but it never, even though Rhett Forrester also, rest in peace. I mean, more of Riot's bad luck is they get another singer, and sadly he gets murdered. But the storyteller in me, this idea that Guy had, which no one ever really does, like, he just got to a place right as they really were finally maybe going to get to take off. Because I saw them, and that was the thing. I got to see him backyard of my house, the little club, and then I got to go to the Coliseum, and they opened for Rush. They played like 6 dates, I think, on the Moving Pictures tour, and I got to go see Rush open. I mean, Riot open open for Rush at the Coliseum, you know, and then Guy leaves, and that kind of like, that was it. And, you know, the legendary story, but I confirmed it. I mean, I do think that Guy Speranza, when he became an exterminator, I do think he showed up one day at Lars's place.
No, so what the story was, Lars was dating this woman who was working at Q Prime as well, named Linda. And
Right.
she emailed me. I can't remember if she emailed me or called me or what it was, but she's like, "Guess who was at our place today?" And Lars was on the road at that point. I go, "Who?" And she says, "Guy Speranza. He's now an exterminator, and he was exterminating." She couldn't believe it. She walked in, and she knew exactly who he was, because, you know, they were all huge fans, and she knew who he was. And I can't remember if she talked to him about it or not, but she felt he was kind of like, you know, he was kind of bummed out, obviously. And that's what, you know, he passed away very early as well. And a lot of people think he got cancer from doing all this extermination stuff too. It's like you said, such a sad story. All these guys had such a, I think Sandy, the drummer, might be the only one still alive.
Sandy Slavin. And I think Rick is still alive.
Oh, is he? Okay, good.
I think
I wasn't
Rick is
sure.
Rick. I think Rick is still alive. I mean, he's still, yeah, I'm pretty sure that he is. I think Rick, if you're listening to this, I think you're like, but the thing is about records, man. And I've been thinking about this a lot since you and I spoke. And it is tragic, all the things that happen to this band. But Mark Reale, who obviously he lived for this, right? He kept it going, and he must have known deep down the thing that great artists sometimes know, which is like, I got to put this music out there and trust that someday it's going to find its way to enough people. And if it's not in my own time, I got to find a way to live with it. And like, it is in the grooves, and people, you gotta, like Brian Slagel said, go put this on and crank the shit out of it, because no matter what musical phase I went through in my life, and I was a really intense metalhead for a period of time. And then I got into lots of different kinds of music. Metallica, I always loved Metallica, and I always fucking loved this album. And this album is never, and Rush. I mean, Rush is for me my entire life. But there are only a few bands and records that I've carried through every format, whether it was an album, a cassette, a CD, digital, streaming services. No matter what, I find this record immediately, and it's in my collection. It's one of those that just goes with me everywhere that I go. And it always will, because Swords of Tequila is like the most badass metal record of all time.
Yeah, I mean, it stands the test of time too. I mean, I listened to it the other day again, and it's just like, man, this stuff is so good, and it's still criminal. I mean, as you know, you do the same thing. We're always out of our way to try to promote this record. Yeah, Eddie Trunks and others, big time fan as well, also. But I had a party over at my house. I have a music house in Vegas where I have all my collection of stuff. And I had 5 or 6 people over, and we have some wine and listen to music. And one of my friends, who's like a big metal guy, and he's like in his early 40s. And we were going through stuff. And one of my proudest possessions is I have an autographed Fire Down Under with all the guys' signatures on it, which is really cool.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's cool. So he saw that, and I go, "Who is that?" He goes, "Who is that? Or you've never heard this record?" He's like, "No." I'm like, "Well, let me put it on for you." And he's like, "Oh my God." He went out and bought it the next day. It's like so great. Like, anybody that's a fan, you can't not listen to this and go, "Oh my God." And it was so, again, it was so ahead of its time. That's another problem with it. It was such a heavy record. If this would have came out in like 83, probably would have a whole different story, because it would have fit right in with all the stuff that was going on. But it came out in 81, which is kind of the transitional period between, what had happened with disco in the 70s, and when all the new wave of British heavy metal stuff started happening in really 83, 82, 83, and then obviously the US stuff. And it just kind of missed out. And like you said, Guy left after this record, and they got another guy in, Red Forster. And they had a little bit of success with Restless Breed, the record that came after this, but nothing like this one record. And I think for what they were going through, and the anger I'm sure they had with, fighting with the record companies, and, fighting the battle against everybody else. And you can feel that in the grooves of this record. And the anytime bands are angry, they make great records. Like Sabotage.
And I would say, Brian, it's a great point. Like, man, Sabbath, it's killing me. I know I'm sure you're going to talk about this stuff on the in the podcast series, but I haven't seen it yet. I had a buddy over the other day, and I have this garage gym upstate in the, I always, if I'm in the garage gym working out, I'm playing records you made and that we loved. But I put on Mob Rules because this guy only likes Sabbath with Ozzy. And I was like, yeah, this shit got such a bad rap, but it is so good. If you did not know this was Black Sabbath and you weren't in love with Ozzy Osbourne as an idea, this album is one of the best records ever made.
Incredible.
Those
I
two
agree.
albums are staggeringly great records of the same era, right? They came out very close to when Fire Down Under came out, I think.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, Mob Rules is my second favorite Sabbath record. Sabotage is the first one. But what I was saying earlier is that like Sabbath was really angry and they were making the Sabotage record. Are you okay?
I missed what you said. I froze. You froze.
Oh, I just was saying that, Sabbath made Sabotage get so angry because they're going through, the managers had ripped them off and they were trying to get out of contracts. And I know Geezer was saying like one of his least favorite records, just not because of the album, but because of the time they're going through there. But meanwhile, it's my favorite because you could tell these guys were angry. And, you can tell on this Riot record that's angry, that they're going through all this stuff. And that makes great music.
Well, yeah, I mean, even when you think and I would say we're talking about Swords of Tequila because it is clearly the standout track, the thing that's like one of the great tracks in metal history. But there are like 5 incredible songs on this record. I mean, Outlaw,
every song
incredible. Fire Down. Really, well, for me, I know every single song in it by heart, right? But I would say like if I just put on some of those songs for Fire Down Under, Outlaw, Feel the Same, and obviously I'm not looking at a record when I'm talking to you right now. I know the track. Like if you just put those on, it's so clear and it's really confusing, I think. Like I was thinking about this today, like, Denim and Leather is an incredible song. There's 10 great Saxon songs, but Saxon shouldn't be 10 times bigger than Riot in my mind. Saxon's a great band, but why are they 10 times more well-known than Riot?
Yeah, well, the Riot thing, as we discussed earlier on, they just didn't get a break. They never. I mean, I never got to see them live with Guy. They never came to the West Coast.
Really?
They played so few shows. They only played on the East Coast. The only time I've ever seen it was that video from the Agora Theater in Cleveland that's kind of bootlegged out there. And I think that was one of their last shows because Guy kind of didn't look super into it. Yeah. But so they never came out here. And, Saxon, they've been around for a long time. They're still around. They're still making really good records. So they've had this whole history.
I saw Saxon at the Club the Palladium in New York. I loved Saxon.
Yeah, it's great.
I knew their records, but to me, they were of a piece. It's, I mean, I understand why UFO was a bigger band because UFO made these, their ambition was greater, right? What they were trying to do was something different somehow. But for me, Riot should be right there, at least alongside bands like.
Yeah. Also, too, you got to remember that I think Elektra, when they put it out, kind of reluctantly put it out, or I think they had somebody there that liked the record because, again, Capitol didn't want it, so they put it out. And as I recall, when it came out, there wasn't a huge push behind it. Again, they didn't do a whole nationwide tour.
Correct.
They just did dates mainly in the Midwest and the East. I think if Guy would have stayed in the band and maybe they would have given it more of had more of a shot, it might have been bigger. Because I agree with you. I mean, this record is just phenomenal. It's certainly in my top 25 records of all time. And that's
a huge statement from you because there's
really
very few people in the world who know heavy metal the way that you do and who've put their sweat equity into it the way that you have. And obviously it's been intertwined your entire life. And I gotta say, it makes me feel so fucking good to hear that from you, and I really want them to get this. It's odd because they're, so only a couple of them are around, but this band deserves their due. They are one of the greatest heavy metal bands. And this album is one of the, I am certain that this album is one of the greatest heavy metal albums of all time. And I'm a numbers and you're right, guy, like you are. I told you the other day, the only time I ever cut school directly was to buy Number of the Beast because I'd heard Run to the Hills on a local station. Like that's the only time I ever didn't wait till the end of school to go to the record store. Like I had to cut school to go to the record store to buy Number of the Beast.
Good man.
Yeah. And I wasn't disappointed either.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, of course. Yeah. That's my favorite record of all time. So you're preaching to the converted.
I saw them at North Stage, this little theater, right at the beginning of the tour before it got huge. But, Swords of Tequila, because every time to this day, if I put that on, my fist goes in the air and I start banging. As an old man, 59-year-old, I start banging my head, right? And there aren't that many albums that I'm willing to risk a concussion for, but I am for that. At 59, I can get a concussion just, banging my head once, but I'm in it. So
that's true. Yeah, and the whole record too. I mean, Alter the King was super fast and heavy for, when this record came out. Every song on this record is so good. And Swords and Tequila being the big one that I think anybody knows. Like Outlaw got some radio play as well, but Swords I think is the one that I hear the most when, it'll pop up on Boneyard every once in a while, which is awesome.
And the riff of Fire Down Under the title track, right?
Yeah, I mean that's super heavy too. And I love No Lies. I love. I mean, every single song on this record is so good.
Me too. Like I said, Feel the Same's a great track too. Each one of them is killer. And I'm so glad. This is a big deal. I think that you're doing this because I think most of the other, even Armored Saint, because John became so famous. Armored Saint is in a league where lots of metal fans really know about him. But I bring this record up to people who really go Quiet Riot, and I'm like, no, I mean. No, it's not quite right, and I think you including Riot here in a special way is a really big deal because you're kind of, maybe this is the beginning of a resurgence of people really recognizing it because, Brian Slagel is saying this is important.
I hope so. I mean, it really, and when you look at the history of metal, because I study that a lot and talked about it a lot, obviously too. I mean, this record is very instrumental because of when it came out. Like one of the first really heavy American bands, and this record again, you listen to it now and it's like it's pretty heavy, but when you're hearing it compared to other stuff, but you put yourself back in like 1980. I mean, you had all the stuff coming from, Europe with like Priest and Sabbath and all that stuff. But really, this was one of the heavier records of all time when it came out. And that influenced so many bands. Again, you talk to any bands from back then, Metallica, Slayer, all these guys, they all know this record and they all were huge fans of it. And seeing a band like that come out, especially an American band come out and be that heavy, was a big thing for a lot of these artists, and I think really had a big impact on so many of that early 80s metal scene, especially in the US, where it's like, wow, there's a US band that's really heavy. Because before we're all listening to everything in Europe and the new wave of British heavy metal and all that stuff, but in the middle of it is this little band out of New York, Riot, that put out this incredible record.
Well, yeah, the little band, the one sort of like burst of not even good luck, but the positive thing was that Malcolm Dome and Ross Halfin seemed to really like the band. And those two guys were really important in the vibe, right? In spreading the word. And I bet they're the ones who turned a bunch of British bands onto them and at least gave it a little bit of life. Yeah,
this record in the UK did pretty well, and the band actually was doing pretty well. They would go over and play some of the festivals and stuff, I know, and they had some success. But it's so hard to lose a singer. And there are bands that we just talked about, Sabbath, who obviously lost Ozzy but got Ronnie James Dio in, and they went on to be even bigger actually at that point. But it's so hard to lose the singer, and you lose all that momentum. And that happened to Riot, where they had these 3 great records, and then guy left, and the singer that after that was good, but it just wasn't the same. It was not the same thing. And it's just tough. If you would have stayed in the band, who knows what would have happened.
Oh, I think that's 100% true. I think if they'd had a little bit of success, that would have made Guy, believe it was worth staying, maybe so. But also, who knows why he really left? Who knows the life he wanted to live? Because, I mean, I've heard rumors, I don't know. I didn't ask Scott. But I've heard rumors that Scott offered him the gig in Anthrax at one point. And
oh, wow.
He said no to it because it was like he was done living that life.
Yeah, that's what I had heard as well. Is they weren't having a lot of success, and they were arguing with the record companies. And I think he had some. I think he just kind of wanted to settle down and live a normal life and not be doing all the stuff. And I don't know if he believed that. I'm just speculating merely that he believed that they were going to have any success. So he went on and did what he did, and he never did anything else in music again, which is pretty surprising.
Well, but in a way, it makes this album all the more an incredible thing to check
Right.
out, because this, and like the first two albums, Narita and Rock City, there's a
good.
lot of fun, good shit on those records, but they are not heavy. You can feel a band wanting to be heavy, but it's not quite the same thing as what happens when you drop the needle on this thing or put this, click it on Spotify or Apple Music, wherever you listen. The moment this album starts, you're in the world of these guys, and you believe these are guys ready for a fight. You believe these are guys ready for anything. And you believe that they're a group that's banded together and that you're invited along and to be on their side. And it's really anthemic, and it doesn't feel calculated at all. And I think part of it, Brian, is right after this, metal became commercialized and calculation got into the game. A band would be heavy, and then they would pick one or two songs that they would do for the other guy, that they would do to get on radio. They would consciously do that. Even, look, I grew up where I grew up. So Twisted Sister, I saw Twisted Sister before the record. I was a sick motherfucking friend. I mean, I had hard, right? I'm the perfect age for it. But even Twisted, Under the Blade, you can't get heavier than Under the Blade.
Yep.
But even Twisted, finally, D wrote a couple of pop songs. And I'm glad that he did. It's great for them that they did that. Riot never had the chance to do that because Guy left. So what we're left with is this perfect moment where they were uncompromising and giving a middle finger to the fucking business. And that middle finger to the business is something that's a gift for guys like us who were in some room somewhere. I mean, you were probably already out, but I was still living with my parents. I'm ninth grade.
No, I was still living at home.
Right. So I'm living at home, and I hate doing homework, and I got bad ADHD, and I come home and I fucking put that record on, and I felt like I was my own person. And that's the power of that music, right? Is that it can make you feel, when you're powerless in school and at home, when a great hard rock record is playing, you're not powerless for that period of time. And this band did that for guys like us.
Yeah, 100%. And we haven't even talked about the song. The song title is one of the greatest song titles of all time. Swords of Tequila. How could, like, it's so different and unique and interesting, and just I mean, those two words probably shouldn't go together, but they perfectly go together. It's so amazing.
I mean, the lyrics are so incredible to this song. I mean, it's like the greatest thing ever when he says, if you see us coming, don't you run the other way. Don't run away, but fight. I mean, come on, man. Swords, Tequila, carry me through the night. I remember just screaming it. If you see us coming, don't you run the other way. Like, it's an incredible idea. And it's so, I would say, as a writer, it is lyrically, it's a funny thing to talk about, but picturing a dude with a handle of tequila in one hand and a switchblade in the other hand, because it's not a sword, it's a switchblade, right?
Yeah.
It's New York City, it's Warriors time, and it's a switchblade and a fucking handle of tequila. And picturing that, and a guy saying to his friends, come on, we got to fucking rumble. It's so badass. And, like I say, being a Long Island kid who was going to rumble if someone cheated at tennis. I mean, it's a different, you know what I mean? It's not really the life I was living, but man, I wanted to, right?
Yeah.
And he makes it, as like I was saying, so evocative. And I think metal is sometimes, I think metal singers and metal lyric writers are, by the broad world, are not really celebrated for how hard it is to do what they do that well. And Bon Scott was a genius. He wasn't a genius Bon Scott wasn't a genius for a heavy metal. Bon Scott was a fucking genius. And as a writer, I can tell, like, when they have these moments of, I mean, Dee Snider, Under the Blade, that guy who wrote that song, that's a genius. I'm sorry, but lyrically, that brings you into an entire world that is so alive to you as a listener, right? You can't believe it. And Guy Speranza on this album did that. On this album, throughout this album, did that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because he's not the typical heavy metal singer, which I think why it's so great, because his voice is very unique, and the lyrics too are not what you would expect from a metal band around that time. They're really interesting and just a little bit different than what, certainly what was happening in the 70s with, Priest and Sabbath and all those sort of things. But it's a really interesting thing because now on Apple Music they have the lyrics on there, so you can, when you listen to the record, the lyrics come up. And a lot of times in those records, like that's what he's saying. I wasn't sure what he's saying, so it's kind of fun to read along with it because you get a different perspective now on the lyrics because you're watching it as the song's being played, which I found really interesting.
Well, I always would look at the lyric sheets. Even as a kid, I loved reading the lyric sheets, and maybe that's part of like becoming that I was going to be a writer. But I always was like transported by that in a way, and taken to another universe by that. And it was an incredible thing that there were. I guess part of it also back then, Brian, is like you could access it. Johnny Z could access it. I could access it. They were the world of heavy metal before maybe 1984, like before these bands became some of the biggest bands in the world. If you loved it and you would show up before the bands became huge, they took you along for the ride. Like, there are all the Steve Harris stories and all the Metallica stories of just like, they understood that the fans mattered to them. And I think that's part of what happened with Riot. Like for me, they didn't become huge, but they took, they came over for fucking hamburgers. And
that's amazing.
But it's the thing about that culture. And it was like Cliff Bernstein would go hang out in these clubs and you could go and see JJ. For me, like I say, I saw Iron Maiden in a club with the rods opened. And like, I met Carl Kennedy that night. And like, he messaged me the other day on LinkedIn. Yeah, me too, man. But I'm saying great. Like, I met Carl Kennedy when I was 16 at North Stage when the rods were opening for, and now granted, I got into it, right? I produced a record for Varney. Obviously I went on and did all the shit I ended up doing. So I was around it, but I'll tell you, I know where I met Carl and I shook his hand sneaking backstage. I snuck backstage at North Stage and I shook his hand, and that's when I fucking met that guy, one of the great drummers, because the metal world was like open to you then, right? I mean, you experienced it and you were smart enough to go, I'm going to record some of these bands, but
I mean, we're all just fans, the bands included. So we were all on an even playing field, the bands, the fans, everybody. And I think that's, why bands like Maiden and Metallica treat their fans so well, because they're still just fans themselves. And they remember where they were and where they came up from. I mean, look, when I first met Lars, he was like one of the biggest fans that I ever met. He was a 16-year-old kid. And, we're all just music fans. So, the metal world's definitely a good world for that, because it's not like everybody's kind of just normal, more or less, even though you'd think that they wouldn't be.
Well, yeah, because why do you pick up a guitar and why do you sing about this stuff? It's because you felt the same thing. Yeah. I'm not talking about virtuos. Look, Van Halen, my favorite band of that whole era. But they were always playing in different. Those were virtuosos, and Dave was a guy with like a 200 IQ who decided to front the metal band. So that was a whole different situation in a way. But for me, the metal bands that weren't like Van Halen, those guys were touched by, if you believe, they were touched by God or by whatever the spirit is, right? Something happened that doesn't happen.
Yes.
Riot, Y&T, yes, they were just dudes who felt a certain way about something and found the best way they could to express it. And we got to go along for the ride. And a song like, but it's rare that in that stuff, it all coalesces. Like if I think about the best of Dave Meniketti's stuff, the truth is he got poppier. That's when the world started to notice. With Riot, the song that we all care about, it's like the heaviest thing they ever did.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when they were at their very best and got this tidal wave of a small tidal wave, but a tidal wave nonetheless of support, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, legendary record. I cannot thank you enough for doing this. It was just a lot of fun. We could sit here and do this all day.
Thank
I'm
you
sure,
for having
but
me, man. I really appreciate the fact that I got to be the fan who wrote in again one more time in my life. Even, to a guy that I know I think you and I did meet like 40 years ago or something like that.
Yep.
But writing you to just be like, hey, dude, I would just love to be able to bullshit about this because I love this band so much and this song. And it makes me sad in a way that these guys aren't around to hear the two of us to know. Yeah. But I got to think that Mark Reale every night saw one or two people in the crowd and it made him know that what he was doing.
Oh yeah, like I said, when they did, when they kind of were with us in the early 2000s, had a lot of stuff going on in Europe. I mean, they definitely, he knew because there were so many kids and so many other bands that, like when they would play those festivals in Europe, like a lot of the bigger bands would come find him and go, "Oh my God, like I'm such a huge fan of yours."
Oh, that's awesome.
That was really cool to see and to hear about that stuff because he so deserved it. Because this is an absolutely brilliant classic record. And again, thank you so much for doing this. Anything you want to promote coming up that you've got going
man,
on?
I'm here for
all music
Riot
today.
I'm here for Riot and you, and I'm so happy to do that. I mean, people can find me on Instagram. Basically, all I do on there now is lift weights. So
there you go.
That's it. But thanks, Brian. It's great to see you, man. Thanks.
Same here, man. I appreciate it. And don't leave yet because we got to upload it, so you have to stick around for a couple minutes.
It's fine.